James Mitchell stood frozen in the cafeteria doorway, his entire body locked in place as his mind struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. There, at a table in the corner, sat his 12-year-old daughter Zara, her head bowed, her small shoulders hunched inward as if trying to make herself disappear. And surrounding her feet, scattered across the pristine cafeteria floor like scraps thrown to a stray dog, lay pieces of food. A half-eaten sandwich. An apple with one bite taken out of it. A bag of chips torn open. A carton of chocolate milk on its side, liquid pooling across the tiles. Students stood in a loose circle, some laughing openly, others filming on their phones, their faces lit with cruel delight. One boy stood closest, a smirk plastered across his face, his arm cocked back as if preparing to throw something else. And then, cutting through the scene like a knife, James watched as a teacher, a middle-aged woman in a cardigan, walked directly past the entire spectacle. Her eyes swept over Zara, over the food on the floor, over the laughing students. And she kept walking. Didn't stop. Didn't say a word. Just kept walking toward the kitchen as if nothing unusual was happening at all. The expression on James's face shifted from confusion to recognition to something far more dangerous. His jaw clenched. His hands, still holding a bag of Thai takeout, began to tremble. Because in that single moment, James Mitchell understood with perfect, horrifying clarity that his daughter wasn't just being bullied. She was being dehumanized. And the adults who were supposed to protect her were letting it happen. But to understand how one of the most powerful men in tech found himself watching his daughter's systematic destruction at America's most elite private school, we need to go back 3 hours earlier. James Mitchell's corner office sat on the 47th floor of Mitchell Tower in downtown Seattle, offering a panoramic view of Puget Sound, the Space Needle, and on clear days, Mount Rainier rising like a sentinel in the distance. At 47 years old, James had built Nexus AI from absolutely nothing, transforming an idea sketched on coffee shop napkins into a $12 billion artificial intelligence empire. His algorithms now powered medical diagnostics that saved lives, climate models that predicted disasters, and communication systems that connected millions. He'd been called a visionary by Forbes, a disruptor by Bloomberg, and one of the most influential innovators of the 21st century by Time magazine. He had wealth that most people couldn't even conceptualize, homes on 3 continents, a private jet, and access to rooms where world-changing decisions were made. And yet, none of it meant anything compared to the photograph that sat in a simple silver frame on his desk. In that photograph, James stood on the steps of the King County Courthouse on a bright September morning 5 years ago. His arms were wrapped around a 7-year-old girl with beautiful dark skin and hair pulled into 2 puffs on either side of her head. She wore a purple dress with white flowers that she'd picked out herself, and she clutched a stuffed robot that James had given her that morning, telling her that every girl who loved building things needed a robot friend. Her smile was so wide, so genuinely joyful, that it seemed to illuminate the entire photograph. That was the day Zara officially became his daughter. The day that after 18 months of paperwork, home visits, psychological evaluations, and more bureaucratic obstacles than seemed humanly possible, she became Zara Mitchell. James's assistant, Linda Chin, knocked on his open door. She was 62, sharp as a razor, had been with him since the early days when Nexus AI operated out of a cramped apartment with second-hand computers, and she was one of exactly 3 people in the world who could speak to him without any corporate formality. "Quarterly reports are finished," Linda announced, setting a tablet on his immaculate glass desk. "Revenue up 18% year-over-year. The European expansion is 3 months ahead of schedule. The new contract with the Department of Defense came through. And unless I'm reading this calendar wrong, you have something that hasn't appeared in approximately 3 months." James looked up from his laptop. "What's that?" "A completely free afternoon. Nothing scheduled until the board dinner at 7. No meetings, no conference calls, no congressional hearings, no angry investors. Actual free time." James stared at his calendar as if it were displaying impossible information. When was the last time he'd had an unscheduled afternoon? He genuinely couldn't remember. The past quarter had been absolutely brutal. A product launch that required his presence at events in 5 countries. Investor negotiations that stretched past midnight. A congressional hearing about AI ethics that had required 2 weeks of preparation. He'd missed Zara's robotics competition where her team took 2nd place. He'd missed 2 parent-teacher conferences. He'd been getting home after she was asleep more nights than he cared to count, leaving notes on her door that he knew weren't a substitute for actually being there. His eyes drifted back to the photograph on his desk. Zara had been so small then, all wide eyes and cautious hope. She'd spent the first 7 years of her life in the foster care system, bounced between homes like a package nobody wanted to keep. Some families had been decent, some neglectful, and one had been outright abusive in ways that still made James's blood boil when he thought about it. When he'd met her at a charity fundraiser for foster children, she'd been sitting alone at a table covered with art supplies while other kids ran around playing tag and screaming with laughter. She'd been building something intricate out of cardboard, tape, and markers, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration, completely absorbed in her work. James had approached her table, curious. "What are you making?" She'd looked up at him with enormous brown eyes, evaluating him with an intensity that seemed far too old for her age. Then she'd said, completely seriously, "A robot. He's going to help people who are sad feel better. Because sometimes people need help but they're too scared to ask." In that moment, something in James's chest that had been locked shut for 3 years cracked wide open. He'd been a widower for 3 years by then. His wife, Catherine, had died during an emergency C-section when everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The baby, a son they'd planned to name Thomas, had died too. James had lost his entire future in one terrible night at the hospital, the kind of night that splits your life into before and after. He'd thrown himself into his company after that, working 100-hour weeks, sleeping on the couch in his office, avoiding the house that still smelled faintly of Catherine's jasmine perfume and contained a nursery they'd decorated together that he couldn't bring himself to dismantle. He'd felt hollow, like a computer running programs without any purpose behind them. Going through motions. Existing but not living. But this little girl, who'd experienced more abandonment and trauma in 7 years than most people face in a lifetime, was sitting there trying to build something to help other people feel less sad. She wasn't thinking about her own pain. She was thinking about how to help others. James had sat down next to her without asking permission. "Can I help you build it?" She'd studied him for a long moment, her expression serious, then nodded slowly. "Okay. You can hand me the tape when I need it." That afternoon had stretched into evening. They'd talked about robots and coding, about her favorite books and his favorite inventions, about what they'd build if they could build anything in the world. When the event ended and James had to leave, he couldn't stop thinking about her. That night, alone in his too-empty house, he'd made a decision that would change both their lives. He'd started the foster-to-adopt process the very next week. The system had been complicated, invasive, and frustratingly slow. There were home visits where social workers examined every corner of his house. Psychological evaluations where he'd been asked to describe his childhood trauma. Background checks that went back decades. And there had been resistance, subtle but unmistakable. Some caseworkers had been skeptical about a wealthy white tech CEO wanting to adopt a black child, asking pointed questions about his motivations, whether he understood the challenges, whether this was some kind of savior complex or PR stunt. One particularly hostile social worker had suggested he might want to consider a child who would fit more naturally into his world. But James had persisted. And more importantly, Zara had wanted it too. She told her caseworker that James was the first adult who'd ever really listened to her, who treated her like her thoughts mattered, who hadn't talked down to her like she was just a kid to be managed. 18 months later, standing on those courthouse steps with the adoption papers signed, Zara had looked up at him and said, "Can I call you Dad now?" James had knelt down so they were eye to eye. "I'd be honored if you did." Now, sitting in his office 5 years later, James made a decision. He pulled out his phone and texted Zara, "Want to have lunch together at school? I can bring that Thai food you love." He waited, watching the screen. 3 minutes passed. Then his phone buzzed with her response. "Really? You're not too busy?" James felt that message like a physical blow to his chest. When had his daughter started assuming he was too busy for her? When had surprise become her default reaction to him being available? He typed back immediately, "Never too busy for you. See you at noon. Love you." He told Linda to cancel anything that came up, grabbed his coat and walked out, stopping only to pick up Zara's favorite pad thai with extra peanuts from the Thai restaurant 3 blocks away. Meanwhile, across the city in one of Seattle's wealthiest neighborhoods, Zara Mitchell's morning was unfolding in a way that had become her painful, predictable routine. Brookhaven Academy occupied 15 immaculately landscaped acres in a neighborhood where the cheapest home cost $5 million. The school had been founded in 1873 by railroad magnates and timber barons who wanted their children educated separately from the common masses. Its red brick buildings were covered in ivy that had been growing for over a century. The library contained first editions worth millions. The science labs had equipment that most universities would envy. The campus boasted tennis courts, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a theater with professional lighting and sound, and a robotics lab that had produced 3 patents held by students. The school's website proudly proclaimed that 83% of its graduates attended Ivy League universities, and the other 17% went to Stanford, MIT, or similarly prestigious institutions. The student body of 600 came from the wealthiest families in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Tech executives whose companies were household names. Old timber money that had been wealthy for 5 generations. Commercial real estate dynasties. Political families whose ancestors had served in Congress. The children of ambassadors, federal judges, and Fortune 500 CEOs. The annual tuition was $68,000, not including the mandatory donations that brought the real cost closer to $100,000 per year. Zara Mitchell sat in advanced mathematics, one of only 3 black students in the entire middle school of 180 kids. At 12 years old, she was already working on coding projects that would impress college computer science majors. She'd built 3 functioning apps, including one that helped dyslexic students decode complex texts by adjusting spacing and font in real time. She loved robotics, astrophysics, quantum mechanics, and anything involving problem-solving and logic. Her IQ had tested at 145. She'd scored in the 98th percentile on every standardized test she'd ever taken. She belonged in this advanced mathematics class based purely on merit and ability. But you would never know it from how she was treated. Mrs. Patricia Donovan stood at the whiteboard, working through a complex algebraic equation involving multiple variables. She was 58 years old, had taught at Brookhaven for 32 years, and wore her gray hair in a tight bun that matched her tight, thin-lipped smile. She taught the children of senators and CEOs. 3 of her former students had gone on to win Fields medals in mathematics. Who can tell me what x equals in this equation? Mrs. Donovan asked, her marker hovering over the board. Zara's hand shot up immediately. She'd solved it in her head while Mrs. Donovan was still writing it out, her brain processing the numbers and relationships automatically. But Mrs. Donovan's eyes swept across the classroom as if Zara's raised hand was completely invisible, as if she were a ghost sitting in the 3rd row. Connor? Mrs. Donovan called on a blond boy sitting near the window. Connor squinted at the board, his face scrunched in concentration. Is it 8? Not quite. Anyone else? Zara's hand remained up, her arm starting to get tired, but she kept it raised because she knew the answer and she loved math and she wanted to participate. Mrs. Donovan called on another student, a girl named Ashley in a designer sweater who also gave a wrong answer. Then another student. Then another. 3 more wrong answers. Zara's arm was definitely tired now, but she kept it up. Finally, Mrs. Donovan sighed with exaggerated disappointment. The answer is -12. Let me show you the steps you should have taken. But Mrs. Donovan, Zara couldn't help herself, the words coming out before she could stop them. It's not -12. If you factor out the coefficient first and then apply the distributive property, the answer is 43. I can show you my work if... Zara. Mrs. Donovan's voice dropped to ice, her expression hardening. We do not interrupt when the teacher is explaining. That is disrespectful and disruptive. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, I just wanted to. And we certainly don't argue with the teacher in front of the entire class. The answer is -12. Perhaps you should focus on following instructions rather than trying to show off. Zara stared at the board, her mind racing through the equation again, checking her work. She wasn't wrong. She was absolutely certain she wasn't wrong. The answer was 43. If Mrs. Donovan would just let her show her work, let her explain her reasoning. A boy sitting behind her, someone named Brett whose father owned a chain of luxury hotels, whispered just loud enough for several students to hear. Maybe at her old school they did math differently. You know, easier standards. Scattered snickers rippled through the classroom like poison spreading through water. Zara felt her face grow hot, that particular burning sensation that came with humiliation. She lowered her hand and stared at her desk, at her notebook where she'd written out the correct solution. This happened at least twice a week, sometimes more. She'd raise her hand and get ignored completely. She'd try to participate and get shut down. She'd excel on tests, scoring higher than almost anyone else, and teachers would ask her pointed questions about whether she'd had help, or they'd suggest that perhaps the test had been easier than intended, or they'd imply that she must have seen the questions beforehand somehow. The bell rang for lunch, and students flooded out of the classroom in a rush of expensive backpacks and designer sneakers. Zara usually ate her lunch as quickly as humanly possible and then disappeared into the library, where at least being alone didn't feel quite so lonely. But today was different. Today her dad was coming to have lunch with her. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small flutter of excitement in her chest. Maybe the afternoon wouldn't be completely terrible. Maybe she'd have one bright spot in a day that had already been exhausting. Zara pushed open the heavy wooden doors to the cafeteria. The space was massive, with vaulted ceilings, long wooden tables that looked like they belonged in a castle, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a courtyard with a fountain. The air smelled like pizza and French fries and something sweet from the dessert station. Students clustered in their carefully established social groups. The athletes dominated the center tables. The theater kids congregated near the windows. The debate team claimed the back corner. Every single inch of the cafeteria's social geography had been mapped and claimed, and everyone knew exactly where they belonged. Zara spotted an empty table near the side wall, away from most of the social clusters. She headed toward it, keeping her eyes down, trying to make herself small and invisible. It was a skill she'd perfected over 5 years at Brookhaven. Don't make eye contact. Don't draw attention. Don't give them a reason to notice you. Just get through the day. She sat down and carefully pulled out her lunch, a beautiful bento box that James's personal chef had prepared that morning. Teriyaki salmon, perfectly steamed edamame, fresh fruit cut into neat pieces, and brown rice with sesame seeds. It looked delicious. But the moment she opened it, she felt eyes on her. 3 girls stood near the beverage station, whispering and glancing in her direction. Brittany Carmichael, Madison Rothschild, and Sloane Vanderberg. Their families owned a pharmaceutical company, a national banking chain, and the largest import-export business on the West Coast respectively. They wore matching designer athletic sets that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Their hair was blown out perfectly, their skin glowed from expensive facials, and they moved through the world with the absolute confidence that came from never having to doubt that they belonged. Brittany said something and Madison laughed, covering her mouth with her perfectly manicured hand. Sloane pulled out her phone, angling it toward Zara's table. Zara's stomach tightened into a knot. She opened her lunch container and tried to focus on the food, but her appetite had completely vanished. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her chopsticks. Then she heard footsteps approaching. Multiple sets. Heavy and deliberate. Her entire body tensed. "Hey everyone," a loud voice announced, projecting across the cafeteria so that conversations died down and heads turned. "Make room for the charity case." Tyler Hastings stood at the end of her table with 4 of his friends flanking him like a gang. Tyler was 13, tall for his age, with perfectly styled brown hair that probably took 30 minutes every morning, and he had a smile that looked friendly and charming until you looked at his eyes and saw something cold and calculating. His father, Preston Hastings, owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Seattle. Tyler had grown up being told that the world belonged to him and people like him, and he believed it with absolute certainty. The cafeteria noise dimmed significantly. Students turned to watch. This had become entertainment, a regular show that played out several times a week. Zara kept her head down, her hands trembling more noticeably now as she tried to pick up a piece of salmon with her chopsticks. "What's the matter?" Tyler continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "Not hungry? Or are you waiting for someone to give you permission to eat? Is that how it works?" His friends laughed, and the sound echoed across the cafeteria, bouncing off the high ceilings. "Leave her alone, Tyler," a quiet voice said from 3 tables away. Emma Rodriguez, one of the few other students of color in the middle school, sat with her own lunch, her face showing a mixture of sympathy and fear. But her voice was soft, uncertain, barely audible. She was scared too. "Mind your business, Emma," Tyler shot back without even looking at her. Then he turned to his friends, speaking loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "My dad says Mitchell only adopted her for the tax break. You know, like a charitable deduction. Like when you donate old clothes to Goodwill. Write it off on your taxes." More laughter, louder this time, spreading through the cafeteria like wildfire. Zara felt tears burning behind her eyes, building pressure, but she absolutely refused to let them fall. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. She would not let them see how much their words cut into her. She pulled out her tablet, the one James had given her for her birthday, with a card that said, "For building your dreams," and she opened her current coding project. She was building an app that could help elementary school students learn multiplication through interactive games. She focused on the screen, on the clean logic of code, on a world where things made sense and followed clear rules, and there was always a right answer if you just thought hard enough. "Oh, she's ignoring us now," Tyler said, his voice taking on an edge. "That's rude. We're trying to be friendly and she's being rude." Zara's fingers moved across the screen, typing lines of code, but her vision was blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Tyler picked up an apple from his lunch tray, the red skin shining under the cafeteria lights. For one moment, Zara thought he might actually throw it directly at her. But instead, he took a deliberate bite, chewed dramatically while staring at her, and then casually tossed it onto the floor next to her feet. "Oops," he said, his voice soaked with mock innocence. "Dropped something." One of his friends, a boy named Chad, laughed and did the same thing with his sandwich, throwing it on the ground near Zara's chair. Then another boy tossed down a bag of chips. Then someone's orange rolled across the floor. Then a granola bar. Then another sandwich. Within seconds, food littered the floor around Zara's feet like scraps being thrown to an animal, like she was something less than human that they were feeding. The cafeteria filled with laughter and the sound of phone cameras clicking. Students were recording this, and it would be on Instagram and Snapchat within minutes, probably with cruel captions and laughing emojis. Zara sat completely frozen, staring at her tablet screen through tears that made the code blur into incomprehensible shapes. And that's when Ms. Helen Crawford, the cafeteria monitor, walked past. Ms. Crawford was 45 years old and had worked at Brookhaven for 12 years. She'd seen thousands of lunches, broken up hundreds of conflicts, and she saw everything that happened in this cafeteria. Her eyes landed directly on the food scattered across the floor, on Zara sitting rigid and trembling in her chair, on Tyler and his friends standing there with smirks plastered across their entitled faces. Miss Crawford's pace never slowed. She didn't stop. She didn't say a word. She walked right past, heading toward the kitchen, her face deliberately blank as if nothing unusual was happening, as if a 12-year-old girl wasn't being publicly humiliated and dehumanized right in front of her. No intervention. No consequences. Nothing. Because at Brookhaven Academy, everyone understood without it ever being said out loud that some students mattered more than others. Some students had parents who could make phone calls that ended careers. And some students, no matter how smart or kind or deserving, would never really belong. At that exact moment, James Mitchell walked through the main entrance of Brookhaven Academy, his shoes clicking on the marble floor of the lobby. He carried a bag of Thai takeout and wore a smile, imagining the surprise and happiness on Zara's face when he walked into that cafeteria. He signed in at the front desk, got his visitor badge and headed down the hallway toward the cafeteria, following the signs and the sound of student voices. He reached the cafeteria entrance, his hand on the door handle, still smiling. He pushed open the door. And his entire world shattered. If you think what you've heard so far is shocking, you need to subscribe right now because what James Mitchell does next will expose an entire system of corruption and privilege that goes deeper than you can possibly imagine, and I promise you, this story is about to take turns that will leave you absolutely speechless. What would you have done if you walked into that cafeteria and saw your child being treated like this? Would you have confronted the students right there, or would you have gone straight to the administration? Drop your answer in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know how you would have handled this moment. James Mitchell walked through the hallway of Brookhaven Academy carrying a bag of Thai takeout, and with each step, something began to feel wrong. The hallway itself was a shrine to the school's history, its walls lined with framed photographs of distinguished alumni dating back over a century. James's eyes swept across the faces as he walked. Every single one was white. Doctors, lawyers, senators, CEOs, all staring out from their frames with expressions of confidence and entitlement. 150 years of history, and not a single face that looked like his daughter's. He heard laughter coming from the cafeteria ahead, but there was something about the quality of that laughter that made his steps slow. It wasn't the sound of joy or fun. It was something else. Something cruel. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. James reached the cafeteria doorway and peered through the window in the door before entering. The scene before him looked normal at first. Students eating lunch, talking, the usual chaos of a school cafeteria. But then his eyes found Zara, sitting alone at a table with food scattered on the floor around her feet, and he saw Tyler Hastings approaching her table carrying his lunch tray. James watched, not yet understanding what he was about to witness. Tyler walked toward Zara's table, his friends trailing behind him, all of them grinning. Tyler was saying something, his mouth moving, and other students were turning to watch. And then as Tyler reached Zara's table, he stumbled. His body lurched forward in what might have looked like an accident if you didn't notice how deliberately he'd positioned himself, how carefully he'd angled his tray. The tray tipped forward and chocolate milk and spaghetti with red sauce cascaded down, directly onto Zara's head. The chocolate milk hit first, soaking into her hair, running down her face. Then the spaghetti followed, hot pasta and sauce splattering across her head, her shoulders, sliding down the front of her pristine white uniform shirt. Meatballs tumbled onto her lap and rolled onto the floor. The cafeteria exploded with laughter. Not just a few kids. Dozens of them. The sound hit James like a physical force. Zara sat completely frozen, her body rigid, her hands still on the table where they'd been resting. Chocolate milk dripped from her hair onto her face. Spaghetti sauce ran down her cheeks like blood. Pasta hung from her shoulders. And she didn't move. She just sat there, trembling, her eyes squeezed shut as if by not seeing it, she could make it not be real. Tyler stepped back, his hand over his mouth in mock horror. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy. Are you okay?" His friends were laughing so hard they were doubled over. Other students were pulling out their phones, and James could see the screens lighting up as they recorded and photographed his daughter's humiliation. One girl, Brittany Carmichael, held her phone up high to get a better angle, her face lit with excitement. Her voice carried across the cafeteria. "This is going viral. Oh my God, this is definitely going viral." James's body went rigid. His mind was screaming at him to burst through that door, to grab Tyler Hastings by his expensive shirt and throw him across the cafeteria, to make him understand what it felt like to be humiliated and powerless. But he forced himself to remain still, to observe, because some part of his brain was already thinking strategically, already understanding that he needed to see how the school staff would respond to this. And then he saw Ms. Helen Crawford, the cafeteria monitor, standing less than 15 feet away from Zara's table. She'd been there the whole time. She'd seen everything. She'd watched Tyler approach, watched the accident happen, watched the aftermath. James waited, his heart pounding, expecting her to intervene, to help his daughter, to stop the cruelty unfolding in front of her. Miss Crawford walked over to Zara's table, and for one brief moment, James felt a flicker of relief. Finally, an adult was going to handle this. Miss Crawford looked down at Zara, at the food dripping from her hair and clothes, at the students laughing and filming, at Tyler standing there with his empty tray and his innocent expression. And then she spoke. "Zara, you need to go clean yourself up. You're making a mess. And Tyler, you need to be more careful carrying your tray. Accidents happen, but try to watch where you're going." That was it. Those were the only words she said. No consequences for Tyler. No concern for Zara. No acknowledgement that what had just happened was anything other than a clumsy accident. Just a mild suggestion that Zara go clean up the humiliation that had been deliberately dumped on her. Miss Crawford turned and walked away, heading back to her post near the kitchen as if nothing significant had occurred. James's hands clenched into fists so tight that his fingernails dug into his palms. His jaw was locked. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring ready to snap. But he didn't move. Not yet. Because he needed to see more. He needed to understand the full scope of what was happening to his daughter. James very carefully, very deliberately, pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking with rage, but he forced them steady. He opened his camera app and started recording video, angling the phone through the window in the door so he could capture what happened next. Zara finally moved. She stood up slowly, mechanically, like a robot whose programming was glitching. Food slid off her shoulders and landed on the floor with wet splats. Chocolate milk continued to drip from her hair. Her white shirt was completely ruined, stained brown and red. Her face was a mask of humiliation, her eyes distant, like she'd retreated somewhere deep inside herself where the pain couldn't quite reach her. She took one step toward the bathroom, her head down, her shoulders hunched, trying to make herself invisible even though she was covered in food and everyone was staring at her. And then James heard it. A sound that made his blood run cold. One boy, sitting at a table near where Zara was walking, made a noise. A guttural, animalistic sound. Monkey noises. The boy was making monkey noises at his 12-year-old daughter as she walked past covered in food. And then another boy joined in. And another. Within seconds, 5 or 6 students were making those sounds, hooting and screeching as Zara walked past them toward the bathroom. James's phone captured it all. The sounds, the laughter, the students filming, and most damningly, the 3 other staff members who walked through the cafeteria during those moments. A teacher carrying a stack of papers who glanced at Zara and kept walking. A janitor who saw the mess on the floor and shook his head but said nothing to the students. An administrator in a suit who looked directly at the scene and then checked his watch and continued on his way. Not one adult intervened. Not one adult stopped the cruelty. Not one adult treated what was happening as if it mattered. Zara reached the bathroom door and pushed through it, disappearing from view. The cafeteria slowly returned to its normal noise level, students going back to their lunches and conversations as if nothing had happened. As if a child hadn't just been dehumanized in front of dozens of witnesses. James stopped recording. He stood in that hallway, his phone in his trembling hand, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. This wasn't a one-time incident. The casual nature of it, the way other students had joined in so easily, the complete lack of staff intervention, Zara's mechanical response as if she'd been through this before and knew exactly what to do. This was a pattern. This was routine. This had been happening to his daughter and he'd had no idea. He felt like he'd been punched in the chest, like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. How long? How long had Zara been enduring this? How many times had she come home and said nothing, protecting him from the truth because she didn't want to burden him or because she'd learned that telling adults didn't help? James walked toward the bathroom, his legs feeling heavy. He could hear crying from inside, muffled sobs that Zara was clearly trying to suppress. He knocked gently on the door. "Zara? It's Dad." The crying stopped immediately. There was a long silence, so long that James wondered if she was going to respond at all. Then he heard footsteps and the door cracked open just a few inches. Zara's face appeared in the gap. Chocolate milk still matted her hair. Sauce streaked her cheeks where she tried to wipe it away. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. But she was trying so hard to look brave, to put on a strong face, even though she was clearly shattered. "Dad." Her voice was small, confused. "What are you doing here?" The question broke James's heart because it contained no relief, no happiness that he was there. Only confusion and worry, as if his presence was a complication rather than a rescue. "I came to surprise you with lunch," James said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Can I come in?" Zara hesitated, then opened the door wider. James stepped into the girls' bathroom, not caring about the rules or propriety. He grabbed paper towels and wet them in the sink, and then he began helping his daughter clean food out of her hair, working gently, carefully, as if she might break. They worked in silence for a moment, James removing chunks of spaghetti and wiping sauce from her face, and then he asked the question he already knew the answer to but needed to hear. "How long has this been happening?" Zara's hands stilled on the paper towel she was holding. She didn't look at him. "It's not a big deal, Dad. It's fine." "Zara, look at me." James gently turned her face toward his. "How long?" Zara's face crumpled, all her brave facade collapsing at once. "Since the beginning of the year. Maybe before. I don't know. It's just how things are here. Just how things are." James felt rage building in his chest again, but he kept his voice soft, controlled. "Zara, what just happened out there wasn't an accident. That was assault. That was deliberate, cruel assault." "I know," Zara whispered. "But if I make a big deal about it, it'll just get worse. Trust me, Dad. I've tried. Tell me everything." James knelt down so they were eye to eye. "I need to know what's been happening." And then it all came pouring out of Zara like a dam breaking. The words tumbled over each other, 5 years of accumulated pain spilling out in that bathroom while James listened with growing horror. The comments about her hair, how it was unprofessional, even though white girls with messy buns were never corrected. The questions about whether her hair was real or a wig. Students asking if they could touch it like she was an exhibit in a museum. The comments about her skin, kids asking her if she tanned or if she was naturally that dark. One girl asking her if the palms of her hands were lighter because that's where the paint didn't reach. Being called a DI hire's daughter, even though James had built his company from nothing through his own intelligence and work, as if her presence in any space was only explainable through charity or quotas rather than merit. Teachers who automatically assumed she needed extra help despite her straight A's, who'd place her in remedial reading groups until her test scores proved she belonged in advanced classes. Teachers who'd express surprise when she answered questions correctly, as if her intelligence was unexpected and noteworthy rather than normal. Being systematically excluded from study groups that formed organically among white students. Never being invited to birthday parties except for the one black girl in her grade who invited her out of solidarity. Being picked last for teams in gym class. Having students move their bags when she tried to sit next to them on the bus. Finding, "Go back to where you came from" written on her locker in permanent marker. Never mind that she was from Seattle, born in a hospital 15 minutes from this school. Never mind that this was exactly where she came from. Having students whisper, "affirmative action," when she got the highest score on a test. As if her intelligence was impossible, as if the only explanation for her success was that standards had been lowered. And then Zara told her father something that made his hands start shaking again. She told him that she had reported it. 3 months ago, when things had gotten particularly bad, when she'd found a note in her backpack that said, "Maybe try a school with more people like you," she'd gone to Principal Whitmore's office and told him what was happening. Principal Whitmore had listened with a patient expression. He'd nodded sympathetically. And then he'd leaned back in his expensive leather chair and said something that Zara had been replaying in her mind ever since. Zara, I think you might be being a bit too sensitive. Kids at this age can be thoughtless, but they don't mean any real harm. Brookhaven has very high standards and very specific traditions, and sometimes students from different backgrounds need more time to adjust and fit in. Have you thought about trying harder to connect with your classmates? Maybe being less assertive? Sometimes when we're new to an environment, we need to observe and learn rather than expecting the environment to change for us. Zara had left that office understanding perfectly clearly that nothing was going to be done. That she was the problem. That her presence was what needed to change, not their behavior. I begged him not to talk to the other kids, Zara said, tears streaming down her face now. I told him it would make everything worse. But he did anyway. He pulled Tyler aside and had a conversation with him, and Tyler was so nice and apologetic to Principal Whitmore. And then the next day, Tyler told everyone that I'd tried to get him in trouble for nothing, that I was playing the race card, and everything got 10 times worse. James felt like he was hearing about a different child, a different life. How had he not known? How had he not seen? After that, I just stopped reporting things, Zara continued. What's the point? Nobody cares. Nobody's going to do anything. And if I keep complaining, they'll just say I'm the problem, that I'm too sensitive, that I don't fit in. So I just try to survive each day. I count down the hours until I can come home. I eat lunch as fast as possible and hide in the library. I keep my head down. I try to be invisible. James pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling her small body shake with sobs against his chest. Zara, you're 12 years old. You shouldn't be in survival mode. You should be learning and making friends and being happy. I only have to survive until high school, Zara said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Maybe high school will be different. Maybe I can go somewhere else. Just please don't make a big scene about this. It'll just make everything worse for me. I have to come back here on Monday. These kids will still be here. Principal Whitmore will still be here. And if you embarrass them, they'll take it out on me the second you're gone. James held his daughter, this brilliant, kind, resilient child who'd been carrying this enormous burden alone, and he felt something crystallize inside him. A cold, clear determination. I promise you I won't embarrass you, James said carefully. But I'm also not going to let this continue. There's a difference. Do you trust me? Zara pulled back and looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Finally she nodded, though she didn't look convinced. James helped Zara finish cleaning up as much as possible, but her uniform was ruined. The white shirt was stained beyond repair. Her skirt had sauce on it. Her hair was damp and smelled like chocolate milk despite their best efforts. Come on, James said. We're leaving. But I have 3 more classes. You're done for today. We're going home. James led Zara out through a side exit, avoiding the cafeteria entirely. He kept his arm around her shoulders protectively, his jaw set in a hard line. Several staff members saw them leaving but said nothing. Either they didn't know what had happened or they didn't care. James wasn't sure which was worse. He got Zara settled in his car, giving her his tablet so she could work on her coding project, something familiar and comfortable and logical. I'll be right back, he told her. Lock the doors. I'm just going to have a quick conversation with your principal, and then we're going home. Dad, please? I'm not going to make a scene, James promised. I'm just going to have a conversation. 5 minutes. James walked back into Brookhaven Academy through the main entrance. His rage was no longer hot and explosive. It had transformed into something colder, more dangerous. He'd built a billion-dollar company through strategy, patience, and understanding exactly how systems worked and how to dismantle them when necessary. He was about to apply every skill he'd learned to this situation. The front desk receptionist, a pleasant woman in her 50s named Barbara, smiled at him. Can I help you? I need to see Principal Whitmore immediately, James said, his voice level but containing an edge that made Barbara's smile falter. I'm afraid Principal Whitmore is in meetings all afternoon. If you'd like to schedule an appointment, tell him James Mitchell needs 5 minutes of his time. Now. Barbara's eyes widened slightly at his name. Everyone in Seattle knew James Mitchell. His company employed 3,000 people. His foundation had donated millions to local causes. His face had been on the cover of Seattle magazine last month. Let me just check, Barbara said, picking up her phone. She spoke quietly into it, and James watched her expression change from professional courtesy to something more deferential. Mr. Mitchell, Principal Whitmore will see you right away. His office is down this hall, last door on the left. James walked down the hallway, past more photographs of distinguished alumni, past display cases full of trophies and awards, past plaques listing donors whose names appeared on buildings and streets throughout Seattle. The wealth and privilege of this place was evident in every detail, and James understood now how that wealth and privilege had created an environment where his daughter was disposable. He reached the principal's office and the door was already open. Principal Robert Whitmore stood behind his desk, his hand extended for a handshake, his face arranged in a welcoming smile. "Mr. Mitchell. What an unexpected pleasure. Please come in. Can I get you coffee? Water?" James didn't shake his hand. He walked into the office and his eyes swept across the space, cataloging every detail. The mahogany desk. The leather chairs. The walls covered with photographs of Whitmore with politicians and celebrities. The rowing trophies from his own time at Brookhaven decades ago. The framed degrees from Princeton and Harvard. And everywhere, in every photograph and painting and decoration, nothing but white faces staring back at him. James remained standing. "I'm going to be brief, Principal Whitmore, because I have my daughter in the car and she's been through enough today. 1 hour ago, I watched a student deliberately dump food on my daughter's head in the cafeteria. I watched your staff do nothing. I watched other students make monkey noises at her as she walked to the bathroom. And I watched multiple adults see what was happening and walk past without intervening." Whitmore's smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, I assure you that if there was an incident, we'll look into it. Sometimes children can be thoughtless, but—" "I have video," James said quietly. "I recorded the entire thing on my phone. I have video of the assault. I have video of the racist sounds students made. I have video of your staff seeing it and doing nothing. And my daughter just told me that this has been happening since the beginning of the year, that she reported it to you 3 months ago, and you did nothing except make it worse." The smile finally dropped from Whitmore's face. He sat down slowly in his chair, and James could see him recalculating, trying to figure out how to handle this situation. "Mr. Mitchell," Whitmore said, his tone shifting to something more serious, "I understand you're upset. Any parent would be. But I think if we discuss this calmly, we can find that there may be some misunderstandings about what happened." "Misunderstandings?" James's voice remained level, but the word dripped with contempt. "I watched my daughter get food dumped on her head. There's no misunderstanding. The only question is what you're going to do about it." Whitmore folded his hands on his desk, and James could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. "Let me pull up your daughter's file. I want to make sure I have all the information." And James knew, watching Whitmore's face as he pulled up the file on his computer, that this conversation was about to get much worse. But what James didn't know yet was just how deep the rot at Brookhaven Academy went, how far the system of privilege and protection extended, and how much power the families of students like Tyler Hastings actually wielded. He was about to get an education in exactly how America's elite institutions protect their own, no matter what crimes their children commit. If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, you need to hit that button right now, because what happens in Principal Whitmore's office is going to reveal a system of corruption so pervasive that it will make your blood boil, and you absolutely cannot miss what James does next. Have you ever reported bullying to a school administrator only to have them dismiss it or make it worse? Drop your experience in the comments, because I think we need to talk about how often institutions fail the children they're supposed to protect. James sits across from Principal Whitmore in an office that tells its own story. Behind Whitmore's mahogany desk hang dozens of framed photographs, white students shaking hands at award ceremonies, rowing teams hoisting trophies toward bright blue skies, pennants from Harvard, Yale, and Princeton arranged like battle flags. The walls practically scream legacy, privilege, tradition. Everything in this room has been carefully curated to remind visitors, you're entering an institution with power. Principal Whitmore himself is 55, with distinguished gray hair and a suit that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent. His smile is practiced, professional, the kind of smile that's been perfected through thousands of parent meetings and donor dinners. "Mr. Mitchell. What an unexpected pleasure," Whitmore says, extending his hand. "Is everything all right with Zara?" James keeps his voice calm, measured. He's been preparing for this conversation all day. He describes the cafeteria incident. Tyler Hastings throwing food at his daughter, calling her names, the crowd of students watching and laughing. Whitmore nods along with that same practiced smile, his fingers steepled on the desk. "Boys will be boys, you know how kids can be," he says easily. "I'm sure Tyler didn't mean anything by it. Sometimes teenage humor can be misguided." James mentions the monkey noises. The smile falters for just a fraction of a second. Whitmore shifts in his leather chair. "I'm sure you misheard, Mr. Mitchell. Our students would never." James slides his phone across the desk. I have video. The change in Whitmore's face is subtle but unmistakable. His jaw tightens. The professional warmth drains from his eyes. He watches the video for maybe 10 seconds before pushing the phone back. Mr. Mitchell, he says carefully, Brookhaven Academy has a reputation spanning 150 years. We don't tolerate accusations that could damage that reputation. Notice what he said. Not, we don't tolerate racism. Not, we don't tolerate bullying. Accusations that could damage reputation. That's what concerns him. What about the reputation of protecting students? James asks. Whitmore leans back, spreading his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. Zara is adjusting. This is a very different environment from what she might be used to. Integration takes time. That word, integration, hangs in the air between them like something toxic. Like they're still in 1960 instead of today. Like Zara is some kind of experiment in tolerance rather than a student who deserves safety. James feels his anger rising but keeps it contained. I want to see Zara's records. Any incident reports filed. Whitmore hesitates, then reluctantly pulls a manila folder from his desk drawer. He slides it across with obvious reluctance. James opens it and feels his blood run cold. 5 incident reports. 5 separate reports filed by Zara in just 3 months at this school. One from September about verbal harassment in the bathroom. Another from October about being excluded from a group project. A third about finding a racist note in her locker. Each one documented. Each one signed. And beside each one in neat administrative handwriting, matter resolved. No action necessary. But there's more. Buried in the file is a report from a teacher, Mrs. Palmer from the English department, who witnessed students harassing Zara after class. The teacher explicitly stated she saw the incident and recommended intervention. The date on that report is 2 months old. There's no follow-up. No investigation. Nothing. You've done nothing, James says quietly. Mr. Mitchell, please understand. You've done nothing, James repeats louder now. My daughter filed 5 reports. A teacher witnessed harassment. And you dismissed all of it. Whitmore adjusts his tie. Perhaps Zara would be happier at a more suitable school. One where she'd fit in naturally. And there it is. The real agenda. They don't want to address the problem, they want to eliminate it by getting rid of Zara. Brookhaven serves a very specific community, Whitmore continues. Tradition matters here. Your daughter is a wonderful girl, I'm sure, but she's struggling to find her place. For her own happiness, perhaps a different environment. You want her gone because she makes your donors uncomfortable, James cuts him off. Whitmore's silence is all the confirmation James needs. This isn't about Zara's adjustment. This isn't about her happiness. This is about maintaining the comfortable status quo for the families who've attended Brookhaven for generations. Zara is a disruption to their ecosystem. James stands. His voice is steel now. You have 24 hours to expel Tyler Hastings and fire Ms. Crawford for negligence. Or I take this to the media. Every news outlet in the state. I have video, I have documentation, and I have resources to make sure this story goes everywhere. For a moment, Whitmore just looks at him. Then something shifts in the principal's demeanor. The professional mask drops completely. He leans back in his chair with a cold smile that has nothing warm or practiced about it. Mr. Mitchell, he says slowly, do you know who Tyler's father is? James doesn't answer. Preston Hastings owns half the commercial real estate in this city. Brittany's mother sits on the state education board. Madison's father is a federal judge. Whitmore ticks them off on his fingers like he's listing assets. The board of trustees of this school includes 3 sitting senators and the CEO of Rothman Financial. He pauses, letting that sink in. Your daughter filed a harassment claim? Whitmore continues. I have 6 families ready to file complaints about her aggressive behavior and disruptive attitude. With documentation. Witness statements. The whole 9 yards. James feels the ground shifting beneath him. This is a threat, calculated and precise. You're rich, Mr. Mitchell. I'll give you that. But your new money. Tech money. The way Whitmore says tech money makes it sound like something dirty. This school has survived on old money for over a century. Old families. Old connections. You can't touch us. The reality crashes down on James like a wave. This isn't one racist principal at one school. This is a system. An entire ecosystem of wealth and power that protects itself. Tyler Hastings isn't just a bully, he's the son of someone too important to punish. Ms. Crawford isn't just negligent, she's protected by families who fund the school. And Zara? Zara is expendable. Take your daughter somewhere she belongs, Whitmore says quietly. Otherwise, her academic record will reflect difficulties, behavioral issues, disciplinary problems. Colleges notice these things, Mr. Mitchell. Stanford, MIT, Princeton, they all look very carefully at a student's record. The threat is crystal clear. Fight us and we'll destroy your daughter's future. We'll make sure she never gets into a top university. We'll label her the problem. We'll rewrite her story. James stares at this man, this principal of a prestigious academy, and realizes he's not looking at an educator. He's looking at a gatekeeper of power, someone whose job is to maintain the hierarchy, to keep the right people in and the wrong people out. Get out of my office, Mr. Mitchell, Whitmore says. Before you make this worse for everyone. Before we continue, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. This story gets even more intense and you don't want to miss what happens next. What would you do in James's position? Would you pull Zara out to protect her future, or would you fight a system that seems unbeatable? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. James leaves that office with his hands shaking. Not from fear, from rage. From the realization that money and success and doing everything right still doesn't protect his daughter from a system designed to keep her out. He thought wealth would be armor. He thought his resources would matter. But Whitmore just showed him the truth. There are levels of power he hasn't even touched. Old power. Institutional power. The kind that protects itself with lawyers and connections and the weight of tradition. And now he has to decide, does he protect Zara by retreating? Or does he fight a war he might not be able to win? James walks back to his car in the school parking lot. His hands are still trembling, not from fear but from the kind of rage that comes when you realize the world isn't what you thought it was. When you realize that money and success don't protect the people you love from systems designed to crush them. Zara is waiting in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, trying to look casual. But James can see the tension in her shoulders, the way she's gripping the phone too tightly. She knows something happened in that office. He gets in, closes the door and sits for a moment in silence. Then he turns to his daughter and asks the question that will determine everything that comes next. Do you want to leave this school? Zara looks up at him. For a long moment she doesn't answer. James can see her processing, weighing her exhaustion against her pride, her pain against her principles. Finally she speaks. I want to stay and prove I belong here. I want them to see me. James feels something shift inside his chest. His daughter, his 15-year-old daughter who's been tormented for months, doesn't want to run. She wants to stand her ground. Then let's make them see you, he says. The war has begun. James doesn't drive home. He drives to his office downtown, and for the next 3 hours his phone doesn't stop. He calls his lawyer, the best civil rights attorney in the state. He calls his PR team, the same people who helped launch his company into the public eye. He calls his COO and tells her to clear his schedule for the next 2 weeks because he's about to go to battle. But then he makes a call that nobody would expect. He scrolls through his contacts and finds a name he hasn't dialed in years, David Chin. His old college roommate. The guy who used to stay up until 3 in the morning arguing about journalism ethics and the responsibility of the press. David, who's now an investigative journalist for one of the most respected newspapers in the country. David, James says when his old friend picks up, how'd you like to expose the most prestigious school in the city as a training ground for the next generation of bigots? There's a pause on the other end of the line. Then David laughs, not because it's funny, but because he knows James doesn't make that kind of call unless he has something real. Tell me everything, David says. Over the next week, James becomes something he's never been before. Strategic, calculating, methodical. This isn't about emotion anymore. This is chess. And he's going to play to win. He hires private investigators, former FBI agents who specialize in institutional misconduct. Their job: interview former students and families who attended Brookhaven Academy. Find patterns. Document everything. And they find them. God, do they find them. Over the past 10 years, at least 7 Black and Latino families were pushed out of Brookhaven Academy using the exact same playbook Whitmore tried on James. Threaten the child's academic record. Manufacture disciplinary issues. Suggest the student would be happier elsewhere. One family's daughter developed anxiety so severe after months of harassment and administrative gaslighting that she was hospitalized. Another student, a Black boy who'd been admitted on academic merit, left after the school threatened to note behavioral problems that would torpedo his college applications. Every single family was told the same thing: your child doesn't fit here. But James's team digs even deeper. They uncover financial records that show something truly damning. Brookhaven Academy received massive donations. We're talking 6 and 7 figures, shortly after several of these problem minority students left the school. The pattern is unmistakable. Get rid of the student who makes donors uncomfortable, receive a financial reward. It's a system, a business model. And then they find the nuclear option. 2 years ago, a teacher at Brookhaven Academy was accused of sexually harassing a female student. Multiple witnesses. Clear evidence. The kind of case that should have resulted in immediate termination and criminal charges. Instead, the school quietly relocated the teacher to a private school in another state. The student left Brookhaven. The whole thing was buried. Principal Whitmore personally handled the cover-up. The board of trustees, those senators and CEOs and federal judges, they all knew. And they all signed off on it. Because protecting the institution mattered more than protecting a child. James stares at the documents spread across his desk and realizes, this isn't just about racism. This is about power. About an institution that believes it's above accountability. About people who think their wealth and connections make them untouchable. Meanwhile, Zara continues going to school every single day. James hired a security consultant, former Secret Service, to monitor her without her knowledge. He gets reports every afternoon. The harassment continues. Books knocked from her hands in the hallway. Exclusion from group projects. Whispers and stares in every classroom. Tyler Hastings isn't the only one anymore. Now there's a whole ecosystem of cruelty, students who've learned that targeting Zara is acceptable, maybe even rewarded. But something else starts happening. Something James didn't expect. A few students start sitting near Zara at lunch. Not with her, exactly, they're not ready to make themselves targets. But near her. Close enough that it means something. One girl in particular, Emma Rodriguez, approaches Zara after class one day. Emma is Latina, a sophomore, and she's been facing similar treatment. Quieter, more subtle, but the same exclusion, the same microaggressions. She and Zara start sitting together. Not hiding, not apologizing for their presence, just existing in that cafeteria like they have every right to be there. Then 2 other students join them. Both white kids, both from wealthy families but decent. Kids who've been watching the harassment and finally decided they can't stay silent anymore. They're scared, you can see it in the way they glance around nervously when they sit down, but they sit down anyway. Not everyone at Brookhaven Academy is corrupt. Some kids are just scared. Some are waiting for someone else to be brave first. And Zara, by refusing to leave, by showing up every single day, is giving them permission to be decent human beings. Then David's article drops. It's front page. Above the fold. The headline reads, America's Elite Schools, where racism comes with a 6-figure tuition. The article is devastating. David includes everything. James's video of the cafeteria incident, testimony from the 7 families who were pushed out, financial records showing the pattern of donations following student departures, and detailed documentation of the sexual harassment cover-up. He names names. Principal Whitmore. The Board of Trustees. The families who've been complicit. Within 6 hours, the story is everywhere. CNN picks it up. MSNBC. Fox News. Twitter explodes. TikTok videos of students reading the article aloud go viral. Former Brookhaven students start coming forward with their own stories. Decades of similar treatment, patterns going back 40 years. Parents start withdrawing their students. Not the old money families, they circle the wagons, issue statements of support for the school, but newer families, people who sent their kids to Brookhaven because they thought it was a good school, not because they're part of the power structure. They're horrified. They had no idea. Donors panic. Major corporations that had partnerships with Brookhaven quietly distance themselves. A tech company cancels a planned donation. A law firm pulls out of a mentorship program. Brookhaven Academy issues a statement denying everything. They call the article sensationalized. They claim they're the victims of a coordinated attack by a disgruntled parent. They insist their record speaks for itself. But the damage is done. The mask has been ripped off. The Board of Trustees calls an emergency meeting. And before I tell you what happens next, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. Because what James does next is absolutely brilliant, and you don't want to miss it. Here's my question for you. Do you think exposing institutions like this actually creates change, or do they just protect themselves and wait for the news cycle to move on? Drop your answer in the comments because I really want to know what you think. 3 days after the article drops, James receives a phone call from a number he doesn't recognize. When he answers, a smooth, cultured voice introduces itself. Mr. Mitchell, this is Senator Harold Pemberton. I'm the head of Brookhaven Academy's Board of Trustees. I think we need to talk. James puts the call on speaker and starts recording. He's learned not to trust these people. You've made your point, Mitchell, Pemberton says. His voice carries the weight of someone who's used to being listened to, someone who's negotiated billion-dollar deals and political compromises. This has gotten out of hand. What do you want? What do I want? James thinks. What do I want? He pulls out the list he's been refining for days. The list he's discussed with his lawyer, with civil rights advocates, with parents of students who've been through similar situations. I want Whitmore gone, James says clearly. Ms. Crawford gone. Tyler Hastings expelled with a notation on his record explaining exactly why. I want mandatory bias training for all staff administered by an outside organization, not some internal consultant you can control. And I want an anonymous reporting system for harassment that goes directly to an independent firm, not to school administrators who can bury it. There's a long pause on the other end of the line. That's impossible, Pemberton finally says. We'd be admitting? Or I release the documents about the sexual harassment cover-up, James interrupts. All of them. Including the emails where board members discussed protecting the school's reputation over protecting a child. Including the financial settlements you paid to make families stay quiet. Your choice, Senator. The silence on the other end of the line is deafening. James can practically hear Pemberton calculating, weighing options, considering angles. Finally, Pemberton speaks. Whitmore will resign. Crawford too. The boy will be suspended, not expelled. His father will sue us otherwise, and we can't afford another legal battle. Everything else we can discuss. Not good enough, James says. Mr. Mitchell, you're asking us to fundamentally restructure. I'm asking you to do what you should have done years ago, James says. His voice is steel now. Protect students instead of protecting donors. Create actual accountability instead of performative gestures. Be the institution you claim to be instead of the corrupt old boys club you actually are. Another long silence. If we don't agree? Pemberton asks quietly. Then I keep going, James says. I release everything. The sexual harassment cover-up becomes national news. The Department of Education gets involved. The IRS starts looking at your tax-exempt status. And I spend the next 5 years making sure everyone knows exactly what Brookhaven Academy really is. He pauses, letting that sink in. You're right that I'm new money, Senator. Tech money. But you know what tech money is really good at? Disruption. I built a company by destroying business models that didn't serve people. I can do the same to schools. Pemberton doesn't respond immediately. James can hear breathing on the other end, the sound of a man who's used to winning suddenly realizing he might lose. I'll take your proposal to the full board, Pemberton finally says. But Mitchell? You're making powerful enemies. I already have them, James replies. At least now they know I fight back. He ends the call and sits in his office staring at his phone. He's just threatened a United States senator. He's just declared war on an institution with more money and connections than most small countries. And he has absolutely no idea if he can win. James sits in his office staring at his phone. Senator Pemberton's offer is on the table. Resignations, some reforms, surface-level changes. But James knows how this works. He's seen it in the tech world 1,000 times. Companies issue statements, make symbolic gestures, wait for the outrage to fade, then go right back to business as usual. Institutions protect themselves. They weather storms. They survive. Unless someone forces real change. James scrolls through his contacts and finds a name that makes him pause. Arthur Rothman. Founder of Rothman Financial. One of the wealthiest men in America. Old money, the kind that's been around so long people forget it was ever new. His name is on concert halls and hospital wings. And his name is also on the Brookhaven Academy Board of Trustees. James takes a breath and makes the call. Arthur, it's James Mitchell. Did you see the article about Brookhaven? There's a pause. Then Arthur Rothman's voice, gravelly with age but sharp as ever. I did. Ugly stuff, James. Very ugly. Your company's name is attached to that board, James says carefully. Your grandson attends that school. Another pause, longer this time. My grandson never mentioned anything like this. He's in the 8th grade. Happy kid, good grades. I thought. Arthur trails off. James, I didn't know the details. The extent of it. And here's the thing about some old money, not all of it but some, there are people who built empires and actually care about legacy beyond just wealth. Arthur Rothman is one of them. He's 83 years old. He's thinking about how history will remember him. And being associated with an institution that systematically torments children of color? That's not the legacy he wants. I'll handle this, Arthur says quietly. Give me 48 hours. James doesn't know exactly what Arthur Rothman does in those 48 hours. He doesn't know what calls are made, what pressure is applied, what ultimatums are delivered. But when you're Arthur Rothman, when you've been wielding power for 6 decades, when senators return your calls within minutes, when your opinion can make or break careers, you don't need to explain your methods. The results speak for themselves. Within 48 hours, Principal Whitmore resigns. Not suspended. Not placed on leave. Gone. The school announces he's pursuing other opportunities, but everyone knows what it means. Ms. Crawford is fired outright, not even given the dignity of resignation. Tyler Hastings is expelled with a notation on his permanent record explaining exactly why: racial harassment and bullying. His father threatens to sue, but the school's lawyers have ironclad documentation now. The lawsuit never materializes. 3 members of the Board of Trustees quietly step down, including Senator Pemberton himself. They issue statements about needing to focus on other commitments, but the message is clear: the old guard is being pushed out. Brookhaven Academy announces a comprehensive reform initiative. New policies. Mandatory bias training. An independent oversight committee. A complete diversity and inclusion overhaul administered by outside consultants with actual expertise, not the school's hand-picked yes-men. The press coverage is overwhelming. Elite school faces reckoning. Brookhaven Academy implements sweeping reforms. When parents fight back, how one father changed an institution. James watches it all unfold and feels, not satisfaction exactly. Relief maybe. But also awareness. These are surface changes. Real transformation takes years, maybe generations. The question is whether these reforms will actually stick or whether they're just performance designed to make the problem go away until people stop paying attention. But at least it's a start. James sits down with Zara in their living room one evening. The house is quiet. His wife is at a work dinner and it's just the two of them. You can transfer anywhere, James tells his daughter. After everything that's happened, after all the publicity, the best schools in the country would take you. Anywhere you want to go. Zara is quiet for a long moment, curled up on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest. Finally, she looks up at her father. I want to stay, she says. If I leave now, nothing really changes for the next kid like me. I'd be gone and they'd go right back to the way things were. James feels his chest tighten. Zara, you're 15 years old. You shouldn't have to be a revolutionary. You should be worried about homework and robotics club and normal teenage stuff. You taught me that people with power have responsibility, Zara says quietly. Maybe this is mine. I have a platform now. Other students are watching. If I stay and succeed, I prove something. If I leave, she shrugs. I don't know. It feels like they win. James looks at his daughter, his brilliant, brave, exhausted daughter, and feels proud and heartbroken in equal measure. She's right. He did teach her that. But he never meant for that lesson to cost her this much. Okay, he says finally. But we do this together. You're not carrying this alone anymore. That night, James makes another decision. He establishes the Mitchell Foundation for Educational Equity. He pours $10 million of his own money into it, just as a start. The foundation will fund scholarships for minority students at elite schools across the country. It will provide legal support for families facing discrimination. And it will monitor institutions for patterns of bias, creating accountability where none existed before. If Zara is going to fight this battle, she won't fight it alone. Neither will the thousands of other students facing the same thing in schools across America. 6 months later, Brookhaven Academy looks different. Dr. Keisha Williams is the new principal, a black woman with a PhD in education from Columbia and a reputation for both academic excellence and zero tolerance for discrimination. She's tough, she's brilliant, and she doesn't care whose parents are on the board. Within her first month, she completed mandatory bias training for every single staff member. Several teachers who resisted the new policies quietly retired. Good riddance. 5 new teachers of color were hired, not as tokens but as accomplished educators with impressive credentials. The student body is now 30% students of color, up from 8%. The school actively recruits from diverse communities now, offering scholarships and support systems. Zara's robotics team wins the state championship. She's team captain. The local news covers it. Brookhaven Academy student leads team to victory. And there's a photo of Zara holding the trophy, surrounded by her teammates. Emma Rodriguez is right beside her, grinning. 3 other students, her close friends now, crowd into the frame. But not everything is perfect. Some families left Brookhaven, taking their donations with them. The school's endowment took a hit. There's whispered resentment from students whose parents feed them bitterness at home, who've been told that political correctness is ruining their school. The fight isn't over. The battlefield has just shifted. Change is messy. Change is incomplete. But it's still change. Before I tell you how this story ends, I need you to subscribe right now. Click that button. Because this final moment between James and Zara is going to hit you right in the heart, and you need to be here for it. Here's my question. Do you think Zara made the right choice by staying at Brookhaven? Should she have transferred to protect her own well-being, or is staying and fighting the right move? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to hear what you think. It's a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. James pulls up to Brookhaven Academy to pick up Zara from robotics club. The campus looks the same brick buildings, same manicured lawns, but somehow it feels different now. Less intimidating. More like just a school. Zara climbs into the car, backpack heavy with textbooks and robotics equipment, and immediately starts talking excitedly about her project. They're building an autonomous robot that can navigate complex environments. Her team is refining the algorithm. There's a national competition coming up. James listens, smiling as they drive home through late afternoon traffic. But there's something he needs to say. Something that's been weighing on him for months. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening sooner, he says quietly, interrupting Zara's explanation of sensor calibration. Zara stops mid-sentence and looks at him. Dad. I should have known, James continues. I should have asked more questions. I should have paid closer attention. You were suffering for months and I didn't see it. I should have told you, Zara says. I thought I could handle it alone. I thought if I was just better, smarter, less visible, it would stop. I thought it was my fault somehow. You should never have to handle hatred alone, James says firmly. That's what family is for. That's what I'm for. They drive in silence for a moment. Then Zara speaks again, her voice smaller. Some kids still don't like me, you know. They're just quieter about it now. Not everyone will like you, James says. That's true for all of us, but especially when you're breaking barriers. But now they have to respect you. There's a difference. They pull into the driveway of their home. James puts the car in park but doesn't get out immediately. Neither does Zara. They just sit there as the engine ticks, cooling down. Dad. Zara says softly. Thanks for not letting me quit. I almost did. So many times. James feels his throat tighten. You're the strongest person I know. I learned from you, Zara says. And there it is. The moment. The realization that everything he's ever done, building his company, creating wealth, fighting this battle, all of it was preparation for this. For raising a daughter who refuses to accept that the world is unchangeable. Who sees injustice and decides to stand against it even when standing is painful. Fast forward another few months. There's a robotics competition. Nationals. Zara presents her team's project to a panel of impressed judges from MIT and Caltech. Her presentation is flawless. Technical, precise, but also passionate. She answers every question with confidence. When the judges announce the winners, Zara's team places third in the nation. Third. Out of hundreds of teams. At Brookhaven Academy, Dr. Williams implements a new curriculum celebrating diverse histories. It's not just Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month anymore. It's integrated into everything. Literature classes read authors from all backgrounds. History classes examine events from multiple perspectives. Science classes highlight contributions from scientists who weren't just white men. Emma and Zara laugh together at lunch and their table is full now. 7 students of different backgrounds, different interests, different stories, all eating together, talking, joking, being normal teenagers. This is what it should have been from the beginning. James stands at a conference in Washington, D.C., announcing the expansion of the Mitchell Foundation to 50 schools nationwide. They're partnering with civil rights organizations, legal advocates, and education reform groups. They're creating a model for how to support students and families facing discrimination in elite institutions. Other wealthy parents are joining the cause, not all of them, but enough. A movement is beginning. And Tyler Hastings? He's at his new school. His father managed to get him admitted somewhere else. Money can still open doors, but the expulsion on his record means something. Tyler is in mandatory community service, working with underserved populations, learning consequences for the first time in his privileged life. Will he change? Maybe. Maybe not. But at least he's learning that actions have repercussions. It's late on a school night. Zara is in her room coding. She's working on a new algorithm for her robotics project, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop screen. Lines of code scroll past, Python, complex and elegant. James appears in her doorway with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He doesn't say anything, just sets one down beside her laptop and sits in the chair across from her desk with his own mug. Zara looks up and smiles. Not the tired, strained smile she had a year ago. A real smile. A happy one. Thanks, Dad. They work side by side, Zara on her code, James reviewing documents for the foundation. Father and daughter. Not talking, just existing together in comfortable silence. This is what peace looks like after war. This is what victory looks like when you fight not just for yourself but for everyone who comes after you. The screen fades to black and white text appears. Inspired by true events faced by countless students in elite institutions across America. Then another line. Change begins when we refuse to accept, that's just how it is. Because that's the truth, isn't it? Institutions don't change because they want to. They change because people like James and Zara refuse to accept the unacceptable. They change because someone with resources decides to use those resources for justice instead of comfort. They change because a 15-year-old girl decides she won't be pushed out, won't be silenced, won't disappear to make other people comfortable. James couldn't shield Zara from racism. He couldn't protect her from cruelty. His wealth and success didn't make her immune to hatred. But what he could do, what he did do, was fight beside her. He used his privilege as a weapon against the system that wanted to crush his daughter. And in doing so he didn't just help Zara. He helped the next kid. And the next one. And the ones who'll come years from now, who'll walk into Brookhaven Academy and find a place that's better than it was, even if it's still not perfect. This is how change happens. Not all at once. Not completely. Not easily. But one fight at a time. One brave kid at a time. One parent who refuses to accept the unacceptable at a time. Zara is still coding. Still building. Still proving that she belongs everywhere she decides to be. And her father sits beside her, watching his daughter change the world in her own way, one line of code at a time. That's the story. That's the victory. Not perfect. Not complete. But real. And maybe that's enough.